Dreamscape presents Puppy Love by Lucy Gilmore, narrated by Lauren Sweet. Chapter 1. Now that was a dog. Harrison Park stood in front of the Great Dane puppy, watching as he stumbled over his feet and struggled with the weight of his oversized head. Already, the animal's sleek gray fur was something to behold. Those beautiful eyes like the sky after a rainstorm. It was easy to see what he would someday become. Majestic and muscled and massive. More like a trusty steed than a canine.
He's perfect. Where do I sign?
A cough sounded at his back. That's a Great Dane. Harrison turned to find the slight, well-dressed woman who'd greeted him at the door. She looked apologetic and hesitant and, well, the same way most people looked when they met him for the first time. In other words, like this was the last place in the world she wanted to be. And he, the last man she wanted there with her.
I thought he might be.
He attempted a smile.
What's his name?
Rock? Yes. Rock. Durable and solid. The kind of dog a man could count on. Harrison crouched and put a hand out to the animal. His fingers closed in a fist, the way the woman, Sophie Vasquez, had shown him. It seemed like overkill. This careful approach to an animal who hadn't yet reached 6 months of age. But what did he know? The closest he'd come to having a pet was the raccoon that lived under his back porch.
I think he likes me.
Sophie coughed again, louder this time. Rock is great, but he's a stability dog, I'm afraid. Harrison turned to look up at her, struck again by how out of place she seemed among this room of scurrying puppies. It wasn't just her air of fragility, which made it seem as though a strong wind would topple her over. It wasn't her age either, although her short crop of dark brown hair and her round, sweet face made him suspect she was still in the youthful flush of her 20s. No, it was the ruffled dress she wore, which seemed better suited for a tea party than a dog kennel. He did his best to smile again. He was trying not to scare her away within the first 10 minutes. It wouldn't be the first time he'd done that to a woman. Or a man. Or, if he was being honest, any living creature with a heart in its chest and eyes in its head. He wasn't saying he was a bad-looking man. A bit rough around the edges, maybe. But he did have a tendency to come across more forcefully than he intended. His friends blamed it on what they called his resting brick face. Like you're going to throw the next man who crosses you into a brick wall, they laughed. Which was all well and good after a long day of work, but it wasn't the least bit helpful here. Just smile and relax, they said. Be yourself, and for God's sake, lower your guard an inch or two to let in some air. Well, he'd tried. The smile, both of them, had already fallen flat, and the idea of relaxing under that woman's wide-eyed stare was impossible. No one had warned him that the puppy trainer was going to be a delicate, fragile wisp of feminine perfection. One of those things he might have been able to handle. But all of them? Yeah, his guard was going to stay right where it was. It gave him some place to hide.
What's a stability dog?
He managed to ask. Well, she began, some of our clients need dogs that can provide physical support. When he didn't do more than nod encouragingly, she added, as he grows up, Rock will be great at leading someone with vision issues or providing a safe landing for someone prone to seizures. You know, for stability.
Oh.
Harrison blinked.
I don't need that.
Not really, no.
Well, what about that one then? He looks like he knows his way around a back alley or two.
He nodded toward the bulldog in the next slot over. Like Rock the Great Dane, this one was prancing about in one of a dozen half-walled pens built in an extension off the back of Sophie's house. Unlike other dog kennels, Puppy Promise kept none of their animals fully caged in. They had room to climb and jump and pop their heads up to say a friendly hello to their neighbors. And they did, too, wet noses being pressed and kissed from one animal to another. When added to the bright blue walls and not unpleasant smell of organic cleaning solutions and puppy breath, the result was strangely inviting. "Rusty?" Sophie asked, as the wriggling, wrinkly puppy came bounding forward. His expression held a belligerence that appealed to Harrison on a visceral level. This dog might not be as physically intimidating as a Great Dane, but he sensed a kindred spirit, grump and grumpier. "No, you don't want him. He'll be a nice emotional support dog someday, but he can't smell worth anything." Harrison bit back his disappointment and allowed his gaze to skim over the other options. He immediately bypassed a tall white poodle that looked as if it had been recently permed and a tiny yappy thing with eyes like raisins. A soft golden retriever with a mournful expression peeped up at him from the corner.
How about...
Sophie coughed once more, cutting him short. When he turned to see what the problem was this time, he found her standing a few paces back, holding her hands out in front of her as if warding him off. His gaze was immediately drawn to those hands, so smooth and soft, her nails carefully polished to match her outfit. His own hands were like burned leather, cracked and calloused all over. That was what happened when you spent half of your life battling wildfires. What the elements didn't scorch, the flames did.
"What is it?"
he asked, his heart sinking at the sight of those hands. They were nice hands, obviously, but he knew what that gesture meant. Harrison Parks has done it again. 10 minutes in this woman's company, and she'd already seen through his sorry exterior to the even sorrier contents of his soul. "The truth is, Mr. Parks, we only have one dog right now that matches your specific needs."
"Okay."
He swallowed.
"Which one is he?"
"He's a female, actually, and she's really sweet."
"Female? Sweet?"
Harrison could work with that. In fact, he quite liked both of those things, despite all evidence to the contrary. "Oh, yes, you wouldn't believe the nose she's got on her. I don't think I've ever worked with a more promising puppy. We were lucky to get our hands on her. Most of our animals come from breeders, but this one was rescued from a puppy mill. She's fantastic, even if she is still a little skittish." Skittish could have applied to several people in his life right now, including the woman standing opposite him. Ever since the episode last week, everyone, from his boss at the Department of Natural Resources, to his doctors, to his very own father, was acting as though he, like Sophie Vasquez, was one strong wind away from toppling over. But he was fine. It was one small coma. He'd get a dog, and it wouldn't happen again. "She may need some extra work because of it, but I promise she'll be worth it in the end." Sophie broke into a smile, her first since he'd walked in. It struck him forcibly that it was a good thing she'd been too wary to pull it out before now. A smile like that, so warm and real, was a transformative thing. It made him almost happy to be here. Almost. "The best things in life usually are, don't you think?" Without waiting for an answer, she added, "Come on, I'll introduce you. She's been eyeing you since we walked in. I think she knows you're going to become good friends." Harrison didn't have time to fully absorb that remark before a tiny bark assailed his ears. A very tiny bark. One might even call it a yap. The great thing about this dog is that she's highly portable. You can carry her everywhere. Portable? Carry her? He stopped and tried to dig his feet into the concrete, suddenly seeing the oncoming disaster with perfect clarity. Unfortunately, there were some things he couldn't resist, no matter how hard he tried. One was the power of a beautiful woman's smile. Another was the force of a 100,000-acre forest fire devouring everything in its path. And a third, apparently, was a pair of raisin eyes lifted to his in trusting supplication.
"You've got to be kidding me,"
he said, as the miniature ball of fluff twirled and stuck a small pink tongue out the side of her mouth. This couldn't be right. He was a man who spent literal weeks in the wilderness, fighting fatigue and flames. He walked for days with an axe over one shoulder and a team of men at his back. He needed a trusted companion, a sturdy beast he could count on to keep him alive. Not...
"This is a joke, right? Someone put you up to it?"
"No joke, Mr. Parks," Sophie said. "Please allow me to introduce you to your new diabetic service dog, Bubbles." It was a truth universally acknowledged that a large, gruff man in search of a puppy would always choose the largest, gruffest one he could find. Sophie didn't know how or why it happened, but every time a man entered the kennel, he was drawn inexorably toward the animal most like him in appearance. It was as though they walked up to each pen, and instead of seeing the puppy for its strengths and talents, they saw a mirror instead. Like getting dressed in the morning or buying a car, they wanted a puppy that exactly reflected the image they presented to the world. Which was why she'd known, the second Harrison Parks walked in the door, that she was doomed. "Now, I know what you're thinking," she said, watching the expression that crossed his face as his gaze shifted from Bubbles to the Great Dane and back again. Disappointment was a disappointingly inadequate word for it.
"No, you don't."
"And I know she's probably not what you had in mind when you signed up for this, but she's very suitable for your needs."
"No, she's not."
"Small dogs require a lot of care, which means you'll be forced to slow down a little when you're working. That's a good thing, right? To be reminded to take more breaks, to put your needs first."
"No, that's a terrible thing."
"Plus, Pomeranians are much better suited for this type of job than you'd think. They have exceptional noses."
"No."
That was all he offered this time. Just that one syllable. That one deeply rumbling sound. A death knell meant to end any and all discussion on a project that she'd thrown her whole self into prepping for. She wasn't sure which part of it caused her to crack, but she suspected it was that last one. Well, either that, or the fact that he looked so unfairly good while he did it. From the top of his disheveled brown locks to the tips of his heavy work boots, Harrison Parks was exactly what she'd imagined when she'd heard about his case. The man was a wildland firefighter, a hero. Every year, when flames swept across the dry lands of the Pacific Northwest's interior, he headed out with his hose and his determination until every last spark was gone. He was tall and muscular, his expression weary with the devastation he'd seen. A bit on the crusty side, Oscar had described him, but totally harmless. What he hadn't said was that Harrison was also a half-buttoned flannel shirt away from being the quintessential lumber sexual, rugged and outdoorsy, and built like a tank. In other words, he was a Great Dane, a bulldog, and he wasn't giving either Bubbles or her a fair shot. "Listen, Mr. Parks." The sharp rap of her voice startled even herself. "I appreciate that Bubbles isn't what you had in mind, but you need to at least consider what she has to offer."